What if the most effective ways to grow food in harsh places were engineered thousands of years ago and still sit visible in ruins, riverbanks, and mountain slopes? A camera moves across sun-baked stone, then drops to a network of canals cutting through dry ground, water turning dust into fields. It climbs over steep terraces stacked like steps, each level planted with different crops. It glides above jungle wetlands shaped into raised grids, narrow channels reflecting the sky. Seed by seed, hand by hand, these systems scaled into cities. If these designs worked without engines, chemicals, or sensors, what exactly did their builders understand about water, soil, and selection? What if the secrets to thriving on this planet were hidden in plain sight, buried deep within the foundations of ancient civilizations? Imagine, for a moment, that the advanced agricultural wonders we admire today are not the product of modern ingenuity, but echoes of a forgotten past, an era where people harnessed the power of nature with a depth of understanding we've only begun to grasp. For centuries, we've been taught that agriculture is a relatively recent development, something that arose only after the agricultural revolution, that long-ago shift from nomadic life to settled farming. But what if there were advanced agricultural techniques, far ahead of their time, known to ancient cultures, techniques that allowed them to build vast civilizations and endure harsh environments without the technological tools we have today? Ancient Egypt, with its grand pyramids and temples, is often remembered for its towering stone structures and enigmatic pharaohs. Yet, behind these monumental feats, there lies another, equally profound accomplishment: the mastery of agriculture. The Egyptians didn't just survive the desert, they transformed it. The Nile, of course, played a vital role, but it was not the river alone that made Egypt a cradle of civilization. The Egyptians developed complex irrigation systems that could water crops in areas where little to no rainfall existed. But there's something even more remarkable in their agricultural achievements, something that modern science is just beginning to understand. Was it possible that the Egyptians knew something about plant genetics, soil fertility, and the manipulation of nature that we've only recently rediscovered? As we peel back the layers of history, we realize that what we once thought of as mere farming was, in reality, a form of bioengineering, one that laid the foundation for what we now call modern agriculture. Just as the Egyptians mastered agriculture, other ancient cultures also displayed knowledge that seems far ahead of its time. Take, for example, the ancient civilizations of Mesoamerica. The Maya and the Aztecs, who flourished in the dense jungles of Central America, cultivated crops like maize, beans, and squash, three staples that today form the foundation of agricultural systems worldwide. But these civilizations didn't just grow crops. They carefully engineered their environment to support them. In places where soil was poor or the climate harsh, they built raised fields and terraced hillsides, creating microclimates that maximized agricultural output. This wasn't mere trial and error. It was the result of an intimate understanding of how ecosystems work, how water and nutrients move through the soil, and how to use nature's forces to their advantage. But the most profound mystery lies in the possibility that these ancient civilizations practiced bioengineering on a scale we can hardly imagine. For centuries, historians and archaeologists have been puzzled by the sophistication of ancient agricultural systems. How did these civilizations manage to feed large populations, even in the most challenging environments, without the tools we have today? How did they grow crops in places where modern farmers would struggle to even begin? And what about the mysterious plants that some of these civilizations cultivated? Could they have manipulated plant genetics, intentionally crossbreeding varieties to enhance growth, resistance to disease, or even taste? These questions have haunted scholars for centuries, and yet answers remain elusive. It's important to recognize that ancient cultures didn't just shape the land. They shaped the plants that grew from it. The domestication of plants, a practice that we now know involves careful selection and propagation, was no small feat. The process of taking a wild plant and turning it into a domesticated crop involves not only an understanding of the plant's life cycle, but also its genetic makeup. This level of control over the natural world was not something that should have been possible without advanced knowledge of biology, a science that didn't emerge in the Western world until the 19th century. And yet, we see clear evidence that the ancient world was engaging in this kind of bioengineering long before modern science had even conceived of such a thing. Let's take a closer look at the mysterious and awe-inspiring agricultural feats of ancient civilizations. The Inca civilization, for instance, is often hailed for its sophisticated farming techniques in the Andes Mountains, one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. The Incas didn't just adapt to their surroundings. They transformed them. They built terraced fields that clung to the sides of steep mountains, creating a patchwork of farmland that could sustain thousands of people. But what's even more astounding is the level of knowledge required to make this system work. The Incas understood how to manipulate water, soil, and climate to create the optimal conditions for crops to grow. They cultivated hundreds of varieties of potatoes, some of which could survive in freezing temperatures while others thrived in the warm lowlands. The sheer diversity of their crops and their ability to grow them in such a harsh environment suggests that the Incas were not merely farmers. They were bioengineers, carefully selecting and breeding plants to suit their needs. The question, of course, is how they were able to do this. How did they know what combinations of soil, climate, and water would yield the best results? How do they select the right plants for the right environment? One possibility is that they had an understanding of genetics, even if they didn't have the tools or language to express it. Ancient civilizations might not have known about DNA or genes, but they could have understood, through generations of trial and error, which plants thrived under certain conditions and which ones didn't. This knowledge would have been passed down through oral tradition, passed from one generation to the next, much like the agricultural techniques themselves. Over time, the Incas, like other ancient cultures, could have perfected the art of bioengineering, using plants not only for food, but also for medicinal purposes, textiles, and even rituals. But the question still lingers. How far did their knowledge extend? Were they intentionally manipulating the genetic makeup of plants, choosing the best traits to pass on to future generations? Or were they simply using selective breeding techniques that we now understand to be the foundation of modern agriculture? The truth is, we may never know for sure. The ancient world didn't leave behind detailed records of their agricultural practices, and much of their knowledge was likely lost when their civilizations fell. What we do know is that these ancient cultures were far more sophisticated than we give them credit for. They were able to manipulate the very building blocks of life itself, plants and crops, without the tools or understanding that we associate with bioengineering today. In some ways, the story of ancient agricultural bioengineering is a tragic one. Much of the knowledge that once existed has been lost, either to the ravages of time or to the destruction of ancient libraries and archives. Even in cases where we have written records, such as the ancient Egyptians' use of papyrus, the details of agricultural techniques were often overlooked or overshadowed by other more glamorous achievements. The pyramids, for example, are what we remember most about Egypt, not the fact that the civilization's survival depended on its ability to cultivate food in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth. Yet, even as we uncover the mysteries of the past, there's a strange feeling of awe and humility that comes with these discoveries. How much have we really advanced in our understanding of the natural world? Are we truly so far ahead of the ancients? Or have we simply lost the wisdom they once possessed? Today, as we face global challenges such as climate change and food scarcity, there's a growing recognition that we might have something to learn from these ancient bioengineers. Perhaps the key to saving our planet doesn't lie in high-tech solutions, but in rediscovering the knowledge that civilizations long forgotten once held. As we gaze back into history, we begin to see the outlines of a civilization that thrived not on technology alone, but on a deep understanding of the Earth, its cycles, and the life that springs from it. The agricultural feats of ancient civilizations were not just technical achievements. They were expressions of a harmonious relationship between humanity and nature, a relationship that modern society seems to have forgotten. But perhaps, just perhaps, The forgotten knowledge of these ancient bioengineers can guide us toward a more sustainable future, where humanity once again lives in harmony with the earth. In the ancient world, the dawn of agriculture wasn't the abrupt shift many of us have been taught to believe. Instead, it was the result of a gradual, thoughtful evolution of ideas and practices that spanned centuries. Early humans, before they even began to consciously domesticate plants, had an intimate relationship with the land. They observed the natural world with a curiosity and patience that modern minds often overlook. They began to notice patterns in the wild, from the cycles of the moon to the shifting of the seasons. They saw how certain plants thrived in specific conditions and others faltered. Over time, they understood that some plants could be coaxed to grow in areas that once seemed inhospitable. They learned to manipulate the environment in small, almost imperceptible ways, sowing the seeds for the world-changing agricultural revolution that was to come. The transition from hunting and gathering to settled farming was not an immediate or simple one. It unfolded slowly across different regions of the world. In the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia, ancient farmers began to domesticate wheat, barley, and lentils, plants that were originally wild grasses. They understood that by selecting the best seeds, those that produced the largest, most robust crops, they could ensure that future generations of plants would be even more bountiful. But this was only the beginning. In places like the highlands of ancient Peru, early agricultural practices were taking root, though they were deeply shaped by the unique geography of the land. The Andean civilizations, for example, began experimenting with the complex relationship between the mountains, soil, and water, unknowingly laying the groundwork for agricultural feats that would astound the modern world centuries later. In these far-flung corners of the earth, the ancestors of ancient civilizations were sowing the seeds of a much larger transformation, one that would change the course of history. As these civilizations grew, so too did their understanding of agriculture. They began to see how much the land could be coaxed into producing, how they could work with the earth, not just on it. Early farmers in Egypt, for instance, were drawn to the annual flooding of the Nile River, which brought rich silt and nutrients to the land. This predictable rhythm of nature allowed them to develop sophisticated irrigation systems, where the once unpredictable floods could be harnessed to grow crops like wheat, barley, and flax. The Egyptians didn't just rely on nature's whims. They worked in tandem with it, designing canals and dikes that controlled the flow of water to their fields. This deep understanding of the land was a testament to their evolving relationship with nature and its cycles. The rise of agriculture in Egypt was not just about survival. It was a foundational pillar that allowed the civilization to flourish. Their achievements in agriculture enabled them to sustain large populations, which in turn fueled the growth of cities, the building of temples, and the construction of those awe-inspiring monuments we still marvel at today. Meanwhile, across the Mediterranean, in places like ancient Greece and Rome, agriculture was intertwined with the very fabric of life. The Greeks believed that their gods blessed the land, and they dedicated themselves to understanding how the earth could be made to yield bountiful harvests. The Romans, known for their organizational genius, took this a step further. They not only refined irrigation techniques, but also created detailed agricultural manuals that outlined the best practices for cultivating crops. These early farmers didn't just plant seeds, they engineered the land itself. They learned about crop rotation, the benefits of planting legumes to enrich the soil, and how certain plants could be used to ward off pests. They developed complex systems of agriculture that integrated plants, animals, and the environment in a way that was far more advanced than anyone could have anticipated. But it was not only in these well-known civilizations that agriculture was taking root. In the heart of Africa, long before the arrival of Europeans, complex agricultural systems were flourishing. The ancient Egyptians, for example, weren't the only ones who understood the vital relationship between water and farming. In the kingdoms of Nubia and the surrounding regions, farmers were cultivating millet, sorghum, and other crops in the arid climate, relying on their knowledge of the land to sustain their people. In West Africa, The cultivation of yams and rice became central to the way of life, with techniques that were honed over generations. These techniques, passed down through families and communities, shaped the landscapes and societies in ways that would continue for centuries. Just like their counterparts in the Americas and the Old World, these ancient farmers were also working with nature, sometimes in ways that seem almost magical to modern eyes. Despite the rich knowledge these civilizations amassed, we still find ourselves in the dark about how some of their agricultural practices functioned. How, for example, did the ancient Egyptians successfully grow crops in the arid desert? How did the Incas manage to cultivate hundreds of varieties of potatoes at different altitudes, adapting them to environments as varied as high mountain plateaus and humid lowlands? The answer, it seems, lies in the deep wisdom of these ancient peoples. They learned not only to observe the natural world, but also to understand it at a level that modern science is only beginning to appreciate. They had an innate understanding of plant biology, though they would never have called it that, an understanding that allowed them to manipulate the environment and crops in ways that seem almost inconceivable today. In fact, when we look at ancient agricultural practices through a modern lens, we begin to uncover evidence that these early farmers were engaging in what we would now call genetic selection. While they might not have understood the science of genes, DNA, and inheritance, they knew what worked and what didn't. Through generations of trial and error, they selected the best seeds and plants, ensuring that the traits they valued, whether it was size, resilience, or taste, were passed on to future crops. This practice of selection is the foundation of modern plant breeding, but it was happening long before anyone knew how to describe it in scientific terms. Ancient farmers didn't have the technology we have today, but they had something just as powerful, a profound understanding of the natural world and an ability to shape it to their will. This slow and steady accumulation of agricultural knowledge led to innovations that would transform the world. By the time civilizations like the Greeks and Romans came into full bloom, agriculture had already begun to take on a more systematic form. The Roman Empire, with its vast reach and organized military, made agricultural advances a matter of national importance. They built roads to transport grain, established standards for land management, and used their knowledge of crop rotation and soil management to sustain the empire. Their practices were the foundation for modern agriculture in Europe, influencing not just farming techniques, but the way humans thought about food and land. Even as these great civilizations flourished, others were discovering their own methods of cultivating the earth. In the Americas, the Maya, Aztec, and Inca civilizations were experimenting with forms of agriculture that seemed eerily ahead of their time. In the Andes Mountains, the Incas developed terrace farming, a system that allowed them to grow crops in high-altitude environments where most other civilizations would have struggled. They understood how to manage water, how to work with the slopes of the mountains, and how to cultivate a wide range of crops. From potatoes and corn to quinoa and beans, the Incas grew an impressive variety of plants, many of which were adapted to the unique climate and altitude of the Andes. These crops formed the backbone of Incan society and provided sustenance for an empire that spanned across South America. But, again, the question arises, how do they know how to do this? How did they manipulate the land so effectively, creating environments where crops could thrive in places where modern farmers would be hard-pressed to grow even the most basic foodstuffs? The answer, perhaps, lies in the quiet, patient observation of the natural world, just as their ancient ancestors did. Over centuries, they built a deep knowledge of plant life, of soil conditions, and of water management. They learned to adapt to their surroundings and to mold the land to meet their needs. Through this understanding, they transformed the harshest environments into thriving agricultural zones, providing the foundation for civilizations that would leave an indelible mark on history. And as we look back at these ancient agricultural practices, we begin to see that what we once thought of as simple farming was in fact a remarkable, sophisticated science, one that we are still only beginning to comprehend fully. Through these early practices, a picture emerges, one of humans deeply connected to the land, using both their intellect and their intuition to shape the world around them. The transition from wild harvesting to cultivated crops wasn't just a revolution of survival. It was an evolution of human ingenuity. Each culture, from Mesopotamia to the Americas, brought its unique innovations to the table, building upon the knowledge that came before. And as we study these ancient agricultural practices, we come to realize that perhaps the true story of humanity's connection to nature is still unfolding, hidden in the soil, waiting to be unearthed once more. In the arid desert of Egypt, where the relentless sun beats down on the land, it seems almost impossible to imagine how such a harsh environment could support life on the scale of ancient Egyptian civilization. And yet, it was here, in this unforgiving climate, that one of the most extraordinary agricultural feats in human history was achieved. The Egyptians didn't simply survive the desert. They thrived in it, crafting a landscape that was both an engineering marvel and a testament to their deep understanding of nature. The Nile River, which flows like a lifeblood through Egypt, was a central player in this achievement. Each year, the river would flood, inundating the land and depositing rich silt that made the soil fertile again. But the real genius of the Egyptians lay not in waiting passively for the annual floods, but in their ability to harness and control the waters of the Nile, turning it into a predictable force that allowed them to grow crops with astonishing precision. It was not just irrigation. It was a deep understanding of the rhythm of nature itself, orchestrated by the Egyptians with a sophistication that even modern engineers admire. The irrigation systems the Egyptians developed were not just simple canals. They were intricate networks of waterways that extended throughout the valley, carefully designed to capture the seasonal floods and direct the water to the fields that needed it most. In places where the Nile's waters could not reach, they dug wells and created reservoirs to store water for the dry months. Their knowledge of hydraulics and water management was so advanced that it has been suggested they might have had techniques that modern engineers only discovered much later. The key to their success was their ability to observe, understand, and predict the flooding cycles of the Nile. They knew when the floods would come, how high the waters would rise, and how long it would take for the waters to recede. This knowledge allowed them to time their planting seasons with remarkable precision, ensuring that their crops grew at the optimal time and that their harvests were plentiful year after year. In a way, they were working with the natural cycles of the river, shaping it to meet their needs, an extraordinary feat for a civilization that had no modern technology to aid them. But there's more to the story of Egyptian agriculture than just irrigation. The Egyptians understood that in order to grow crops successfully, they needed not only water, but also the right kinds of soil, the proper planting techniques, and the ability to control pests and diseases. They did not have the pesticides and fertilizers that we rely on today, but they had something that may have been even more powerful, an intimate understanding of the land. They learned which crops thrived in certain types of soil and how to enrich the soil to make it more fertile. They developed techniques to crop rotation, allowing them to maintain soil health and prevent it from becoming depleted after several harvests. They even made use of organic compost, turning plant material and animal waste into natural fertilizers that enriched the soil. And just as they had mastered the art of controlling water, they also developed strategies for controlling pests. They used natural predators, like certain birds and insects, to keep harmful pests in check. They even relied on certain plants, like the strong-scented marjoram, which acted as a natural insect repellent, to protect their crops from harm. All of these techniques demonstrate a deep, almost intuitive understanding of the agricultural process. It didn't simply react to the land. They shaped it, nurtured it, and worked in harmony with it. The agricultural feats of the Egyptians were not confined to the Nile Valley. They also extended to the creation of new types of crops. Through selective breeding, they developed new strains of plants that were better suited to the Egyptian environment. For example, the Egyptians were known for their cultivation of flax, a plant that is particularly sensitive to soil conditions and moisture levels. Over time, they developed flax varieties that could thrive in the arid conditions of Egypt. And from this plant, they not only produced food, but also linen, a textile that became one of the most important exports of ancient Egypt. This was no ordinary farming. This was the art of bioengineering, carried out in the absence of modern scientific knowledge, yet with an understanding of nature that still seems remarkably sophisticated. They didn't just grow crops for food. They grew them for utility, for trade, and for spiritual significance. Agriculture in ancient Egypt was deeply intertwined with the culture, religion, and economy of the civilization. Fields were not just places of sustenance. They were also sacred spaces. The Egyptians believed that the act of planting, growing, and harvesting was a divine process, one that was overseen by the gods. Agriculture was seen as a gift from the gods, and the very act of tending to the land was a form of worship. The crops they grew were not just for their own survival. They were offerings to the divine, and the harvest itself was a ritual that reinforced the bond between the people and their gods. Perhaps one of the most fascinating aspects of Egyptian agriculture was their ability to adapt to the challenges of the desert. While other civilizations struggled to survive in arid environments, the Egyptians not only thrived, they transformed the land into a fertile paradise. The desert, with its harsh, unforgiving conditions, was reshaped by their ingenuity into a garden that supported one of the most advanced civilizations of the ancient world. This ability to turn barren land into productive farmland is one of the great mysteries of ancient Egypt. How did they manage to make the desert bloom? Some scholars have suggested that their success was due to a combination of factors, including their advanced understanding of irrigation, their ability to manipulate the landscape, and their knowledge of crop selection. But it's also possible that there were elements of their agricultural practices that we still don't fully understand. Were their secrets passed down through generations? Knowledge that was lost over time as Egypt's power waned? It's possible that the key to their agricultural success lies not just in their practical techniques, but in a deeper, more spiritual understanding of the land itself. As we consider the mystery of ancient Egyptian agriculture, it becomes clear that they were not merely surviving. They were flourishing. They built an empire that could sustain millions of people, not just through warfare and conquest, but through an intricate, highly efficient agricultural system. Their civilization was built on the foundation of the land, and their success in mastering the natural world allowed them to develop a rich culture, economy, and society. The techniques they developed in agriculture were passed down through generations and became the bedrock of Egyptian society. And yet, for all their accomplishments, much of their agricultural knowledge was lost over time, wiped away by the sands of history. What we know today about Egyptian agriculture comes to us through the remnants of their irrigation systems, their texts, and the agricultural tools they left behind. But we'll never fully know how they achieved the remarkable feats they did. The gap between ancient knowledge and modern understanding is wide, and while we have made tremendous strides in agriculture, we are still left wondering just how much the Egyptians understood about the land, and how much of their knowledge was lost forever. The story of ancient Egyptian agriculture is a reminder that knowledge is often fleeting, but also that the relationship between humanity and the land is one that can shape the course of history. The Egyptians were not simply farmers. They were environmental engineers, working with the land in ways that modern science is only just beginning to understand. And as we look back at their achievements, we are left with the thought that perhaps there are still lessons to be learned from their ancient ways, lessons that could help us tackle the agricultural challenges of the present and future. The Egyptians, it seems, were not just building an empire. They were building a legacy of sustainability and harmony with nature that we are only beginning to appreciate. Their story is one of triumph over adversity, of understanding the land in a way that allowed them to thrive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. And perhaps, in their agricultural wisdom, we can find the answers to some of the most pressing questions of our own time. As we turn our attention to the agricultural wonders of the ancient world, one of the most intriguing aspects of their accomplishments lies in the realm of bioengineering, an idea that may seem impossibly modern when applied to ancient civilizations. What if, long before the rise of biotechnology and genetic science, ancient cultures were already practicing methods of plant manipulation that were far ahead of their time? The more we explore ancient agricultural feats, the more we begin to wonder whether they had knowledge of genetic selection, hybridization, and crop engineering, knowledge that might have been lost to history. What is even more fascinating is the possibility that these civilizations didn't just rely on nature. They altered it to fit their needs, creating plants that were uniquely suited to their environments and the demands of their societies. These early pioneers of agricultural bioengineering left behind hints of their practices in the form of plants, tools, and records that reveal a sophisticated understanding of a natural world, an understanding that may have been far more advanced than we ever imagined. One of the most notable examples of ancient bioengineering is the cultivation of crops in the harsh, high-altitude environments of the Andes Mountains. The Inca Empire, known for its awe-inspiring feats of engineering and urban planning, also achieved remarkable agricultural successes that allowed them to thrive in one of the most challenging climates on Earth. In the high-altitude regions of Peru, the Incas developed complex systems of agriculture that included the use of terraces, advanced irrigation techniques, and crop rotation. But it wasn't just the careful management of land that set them apart. It was their ability to cultivate a wide range of plants, each with specific traits suited to the unique conditions of the Andean highlands. The Incas grew potatoes, quinoa, and maize, among other crops, but the way they manipulated these plants was truly extraordinary. Through selective breeding, they developed hundreds of different varieties of potatoes, each adapted to a particular altitude or climate. They also experimented with crossbreeding, creating hybrid varieties of plants that had traits from different species, traits that made them more resistant to disease, more drought-tolerant, or more productive. This was no mere trial and error. It was the result of generations of careful observation and experimentation, rooted in a profound understanding of how plants grew, how they interacted with their environment, and how those interactions could be influenced. Similarly, the Mayans, who thrived in the jungles of Mesoamerica, were not just skilled farmers. They were bioengineers in their own right. The Mayans cultivated an impressive array of crops, including maize, beans, squash, and cacao, and they did so in an environment that was far from ideal for agriculture. The rainforests of Central America are dense and unpredictable, with heavy rains followed by long periods of drought, and the soil can be nutrient-poor and difficult to cultivate. Yet the Mayans were able to turn this challenging landscape into a productive agricultural center. How did they do it? They didn't simply rely on the land to provide for them. They altered the land itself. The Mayans built raised fields and canals, creating a network of waterways that helped to control the flow of water during the rainy season, preventing the field from flooding and allowing for better drainage during the dry season. They also developed an intricate system of soil management, using organic matter to enrich the soil and prevent erosion. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Mayan agriculture was their ability to manipulate plants to suit their needs. Like the Incas, the Mayans understood the importance of selective breeding, and they carefully selected seed from the best plants, ensuring that future crops would be more productive and resilient. They also developed advanced methods for hybridizing plants, creating new varieties of crops that could thrive in the changing conditions of the rainforest. In many ways, the Mayans were ahead of their time, using techniques that modern agricultural scientists are only beginning to explore. While the civilizations of the Americas were engaging in sophisticated bioengineering, other ancient cultures across the globe were also pushing the boundaries of agricultural innovation. In ancient Egypt, for example, the ability to grow crops in the desert was not solely the result of clever irrigation systems. It was also the result of a deep understanding of plant biology and the potential for bioengineering. The Egyptians developed methods for improving crop yields through selective breeding, particularly in crops like flax and wheat. Over time, they cultivated varieties that were better suited to the harsh desert conditions, ensuring that their crops thrived despite the extreme heat and lack of rainfall. Even more remarkable was the Egyptians' use of grafting, a technique that involved joining two plant parts together to create a new, more resilient plant. This technique, which is still used in modern horticulture, allowed the Egyptians to create hybrid plants that were stronger and more productive than their wild counterparts. It is possible that these early bioengineers were using a form of genetic manipulation, without knowing it, that enabled them to create plants that could survive in the unforgiving climate of Egypt. Similarly, in Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, the early Sumerians and Babylonians made remarkable advances in agriculture, many of which were deeply tied to the cultivation of crops that were genetically improved through selective breeding. In the fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, these ancient peoples grew wheat, barley, and legumes, but they did not simply accept the plants that grew naturally in the region. They actively selected the seeds from the best plants, choosing those that produced the largest and most robust crops. Over time, this process led to the development of new strains of crops that were better adapted to the environment and more productive. This early form of selective breeding was a key factor in the growth of Mesopotamian civilization, as it allowed the people to produce enough food to sustain large populations and support the growth of cities and empires. The practice of selecting and propagating the best seeds continued for centuries, influencing the agricultural practices of other ancient civilizations and eventually forming the foundation of modern farming. These examples from the Americas, Egypt, and Mesopotamia reveal a common thread. Ancient civilizations were not merely passive participants in the natural world. They were active agents, shaping and manipulating the environment to meet their needs. Through selective breeding, hybridization, and other forms of plant manipulation, these early agricultural societies were practicing a form of bioengineering that modern science is only now beginning to understand. It is clear that these ancient people possessed a deep, intuitive knowledge of plant biology, and they used that knowledge to create crops that were not only more productive, but also more resilient, more suited to their specific environments, and better able to withstand the challenges of disease, drought, and pests. But while we can admire the ingenuity of these ancient bioengineers, we must also acknowledge the mystery that surrounds their work. How did they gain such a profound understanding of the natural world without the benefit of modern scientific tools and techniques? How did they know how to manipulate plants at such a fundamental level, even though they had no knowledge of genetics or molecular biology? It is possible that these ancient people were guided by a wisdom that we have long since lost, a wisdom passed down through generations and refined over centuries. Perhaps they had learned from nature itself, observing the way plants interacted with their environment and using that knowledge to guide their agricultural practices. In a way, they were the first bioengineers, creating new forms of life that suited their needs and ensuring their survival in some of the most challenging environments on Earth. As we continue to explore the agricultural wonders of ancient civilizations, we are left with the tantalizing possibility that these early bioengineers were far more advanced than we ever imagined. Their ability to manipulate the natural world, to create plants that were more productive, resilient, and suited to their environments, was a remarkable achievement, one that modern scientists are only beginning to fully appreciate. And as we face the challenges of feeding a growing global population and addressing the environmental crisis, we may find that the ancient wisdom of these agricultural pioneers holds the key to solving some of the most pressing issues of our time. The bioengineering feats of ancient civilizations remind us that the natural world is not something to be conquered, but something to be understood and worked with, a lesson that we may need to relearn if we are to create a sustainable future for ourselves and for generations to come. As we continue to unravel the mysteries of ancient agricultural techniques, it becomes increasingly clear that these civilizations were not simply surviving in their environments. They were transforming them. The methods they employed were not just about cultivating food. They were about reshaping entire ecosystems to meet the demands of their growing societies. Across the globe, from the temperate plains of Mesopotamia to the high deserts of the Andes, ancient civilizations practiced agricultural feats that not only ensured their survival, but also allowed them to flourish in ways that still astound us today. Yet, what truly sets these ancient bioengineers apart is their ability to adapt to and manipulate the natural world without the tools and knowledge we take for granted today. Through trial, observation, and perhaps even a deeper understanding of the rhythms of nature, They created agricultural systems that allowed them to thrive in some of the harshest climates on Earth. One of the most fascinating aspects of ancient agriculture is the way in which these civilizations used their understanding of water to overcome challenges. Water, after all, is the lifeblood of agriculture, and many of the greatest agricultural successes of ancient cultures were based on their ability to manage this precious resource. In Egypt, the annual flooding of the Nile River provided the fertile soil needed to grow crops, but the Egyptians didn't simply rely on the river's unpredictable behavior. Instead, they developed sophisticated systems of irrigation that allowed them to control the flow of water and direct it where it was needed most. By building canals, dams, and reservoirs, they were able to store water during the flood season and release it slowly during the dry months, ensuring a consistent and reliable supply for their fields. This careful manipulation of the Nile's waters was more than just an engineering marvel. It was a testament to the Egyptians' intimate understanding of the land, the river, and the cycles of nature that governed them. Similar innovations can be found in the agricultural systems of other ancient civilizations. In the high Andes, the Incas developed an intricate network of irrigation systems that allowed them to grow crops in the difficult and variable climates of the mountains. By constructing canals and aqueducts that channeled water from mountain springs, they were able to irrigate fields at high altitudes, where rainfall was sparse and unpredictable. But it wasn't just about transporting water, it was about knowing where and how to use it. The Incas understood the concept of microclimates, creating terraces and steppe fields that allowed them to grow crops at different altitudes, where temperature and humidity varied. These terraces, often built into the sides of mountains, were a brilliant adaptation to the Andean landscape, allowing the Incas to grow a wide variety of crops in a region that would have otherwise been inhospitable to agriculture. From potatoes to maize, the Incas grew a diverse array of crops, each suited to a specific elevation and microclimate. The key to their success was not just the engineering of the terraces, but their deep knowledge of how water, temperature, and altitude influence plant growth. In Mesoamerica, the ancient Maya also demonstrated remarkable ingenuity in water management. The Maya civilization, which flourished in the dense rainforests of Central America, faced the challenge of growing crops in a region where seasonal rainfall was unpredictable. In response, the Maya built sophisticated systems of raised fields and canals to capture and store water during the rainy season. These raised fields, often built on swampy or flooded land, allowed the Maya to grow crops such as maize, beans, and squash in areas that would otherwise have been unsuitable for farming. The raised fields also helped to regulate soil temperature and moisture, creating an ideal environment for crops to thrive. By carefully managing the flow of water and using it to their advantage, the Maya were able to support large populations and create a highly productive agricultural system that sustained their civilization for centuries. The use of terraces and irrigation systems is not limited to the ancient civilizations of the Americas. In Southeast Asia, the ancient civilizations of the Khmer Empire also developed advanced agricultural techniques that allowed them to grow crops in challenging environments. The Khmer, who built the magnificent temples of Angkor, were also master engineers when it came to water management. They constructed elaborate canal systems and reservoirs to control the flow of water, ensuring that their rice fields received a steady supply of irrigation. In fact, the Khmer were so adept at managing water that they were able to grow rice in areas where the natural water supply was insufficient, using their intricate systems of canals and reservoirs to store and distribute water across vast areas of land. These hydraulic systems were so advanced that they not only supported agriculture, but also allowed the Khmer Empire to build one of the most powerful and prosperous civilizations in Southeast Asia. Water, however, was not the only factor that ancient civilizations had to manage in order to create successful agricultural systems. Soil quality and crop diversity were just as critical to their success. The ancient Egyptians, for example, were keenly aware of the importance of soil fertility. They understood that in order to grow healthy, productive crops, they needed to enrich the soil with nutrients. This was accomplished through a combination of natural fertilizers, such as manure and organic compost, and the use of the rich silt deposited by the Nile's floods. The Egyptians also practiced crop rotation, alternating between different types of crops in order to prevent soil depletion and ensure that the soil remained fertile year after year. Their understanding of soil management was not just an agricultural practice. It was an environmental strategy that helped sustain their civilization for millennia. The ancient Maya, too, practiced crop rotation, but they went a step further by developing complex systems of agroforestry. Instead of simply clearing land for agriculture, the Maya worked with the forest, carefully selecting trees and plants that would support their crops and improve soil quality. This form of mixed farming, where crops were grown alongside trees and other plants, helped to prevent soil erosion and maintain a healthy ecosystem. By planting nitrogen-fixing plants alongside maize and beans, the Maya enriched the soil naturally, reducing the need for artificial fertilizers. This sustainable approach to farming allowed them to maintain a delicate balance between their agricultural needs and the health of the surrounding environment. The ancient Incas, too, were pioneers in the field of soil management. In addition to their advanced irrigation systems, they developed a deep understanding of soil fertility and crop selection. In the high-altitude regions of the Andes, where soil quality varied dramatically, the Incas carefully selected crops that were suited to the specific soil conditions of each region. They also used a technique called mound planting, where crops were planted in raised mounds of soil, which helped to improve drainage and prevent waterlogging. This method not only enhanced crop growth, but also allowed the Incas to cultivate crops in areas where the soil was otherwise too poor to support agriculture. In addition to water and soil, ancient civilizations also understood the importance of plant diversity in maintaining a stable and sustainable agricultural system. The Maya, for example, grew a wide range of crops, from staple foods like maize and beans to tropical fruits like cacao and papaya. This diversity not only provided a steady food supply, but also helped to protect against crop failures caused by pests, disease, or environmental factors. Similarly, the Incas cultivated hundreds of different varieties of potatoes, each adapted to a specific altitude and microclimate. This genetic diversity ensured that even if one crop failed due to disease or drought, others would still thrive. The ability to grow a diverse range of crops was a key factor in the long-term success of these ancient agricultural systems, and it is a practice that modern agriculture is increasingly rediscovering as we face the challenges of climate change and food security. The careful balance between nature and cultivation was not only a practical necessity for ancient civilizations, it was also a cultural and spiritual belief. In many ancient societies, agriculture was seen as a sacred practice, and the relationship between humans and the land was governed by religious and spiritual principles. The Egyptians, for example, believed that the god Osiris was the deity of agriculture and fertility, and the annual flooding of the Nile was seen as a divine gift. Similarly, the Maya viewed agriculture as a sacred act, with crops being offerings to the gods. For the Incas, agriculture was a central part of their religious beliefs, and the act of planting and harvesting was seen as a way of honoring their ancestors and the gods. This spiritual connection to the land ensured that agriculture was not just about sustenance. It was about maintaining a harmonious relationship with nature. As we examine these ancient agricultural systems, it becomes clear that the civilizations of the past were not just reacting to the environment. They were actively shaping it to suit their needs. Through sophisticated irrigation systems, soil management techniques, and crop diversity, they created sustainable agricultural systems that allowed them to thrive in some of the most challenging environments on Earth. Their deep understanding of water, soil, and plant life was not just a matter of survival. It was a reflection of their intimate relationship with nature. Today, as we face the challenges of feeding a growing global population and protecting the environment, there is much we can learn from these ancient bioengineers. Their methods, honed over centuries of trial and error, offer us valuable lessons in sustainability and environmental stewardship. lessons that may help guide us toward a more harmonious future with the planet. When we examine the intricate agricultural systems of ancient civilizations, it becomes increasingly clear that these cultures didn't just manipulate the land, they did so with a deep respect for the ecosystems they were shaping. In many ways, they seem to intuitively understand the delicate balance required to maintain both agricultural productivity and environmental harmony. These early agricultural societies were not simply driven by the need to survive. They were driven by a desire to sustain themselves in ways that aligned with the natural rhythms of the world around them. They weren't simply harvesting crops. They were stewarding the land, transforming barren regions into fertile plains and adapting to the ever-changing conditions of nature. The more we delve into their practices, the more we realize that these civilizations were not only ahead of their time. They were creating the foundations of agricultural knowledge that would resonate through the ages, influencing the way we think about farming even today. One of the most compelling examples of ancient environmental stewardship can be found in the civilization of the ancient Maya, whose agricultural systems were as sophisticated as any in the ancient world. They inhabited the dense tropical rainforests of Central America, a place where heavy rainfall, humidity, and poor soil quality made farming an incredibly difficult task. Yet, they managed to build a thriving society that relied heavily on agriculture, particularly the cultivation of maize, beans, and squash, often referred to as the Maya triad due to their importance to the culture. The Maya did not simply plant their crops and hope for the best. They meticulously engineered their agricultural landscape to overcome the region's natural challenges. They constructed raised fields and canals, not unlike those of ancient Egypt, to control the flow of water during the wet season. By lifting their fields above the surrounding wetlands, they reduced the risks of flooding while ensuring that crops received adequate drainage. These raised fields, combined with their expertise in water management, helped ensure the success of the Maya agricultural system. But it wasn't just about irrigation. It was about creating a system that worked in harmony with the land. The Maya used the forest itself to support their crops, integrating trees and plants that provided natural shelter, nutrients, and protection. In essence, they cultivated a symbiotic relationship with their environment, one that allowed both their crops and the surrounding ecosystem to flourish together. This deep connection between agriculture and the natural environment is also evident in the farming practices of the ancient Incas, who conquered and transformed the harsh terrain of the Andes Mountains into one of the most productive agricultural regions in the ancient world. The Incan approach to farming was both innovative and highly adaptive. They built terraced fields, carving into the mountainsides to create flat, arable land where crops could be cultivated at various elevations. These terraces, held in place by stone walls, not only prevented soil erosion, but also provided a way to grow a variety of crops in different climatic zones. At the highest elevations, where temperatures could drop below freezing, the Incas grew cold-resistant crops such as quinoa, while at lower altitudes, they cultivated maize, potatoes, and other staples. What made the Incan agricultural system so remarkable wasn't just their engineering prowess, but their ability to manage the region's varied microclimates. They understood how to harness the natural water sources of the Andes, diverting streams to irrigate crops and ensuring that water was distributed evenly across the terraces. In many ways, the Incas were masters of environmental adaptation, cultivating an agricultural system that could thrive in an area that would otherwise seem inhospitable to farming. Perhaps even more intriguing is the way the Incas utilized the region's vast biodiversity to support their agricultural system. They didn't simply rely on a handful of staple crops. They cultivated hundreds of varieties of plants, each carefully chosen to suit the unique conditions of the Andes. They were particularly adept at growing potatoes, a crop that has an extraordinary ability to adapt to high-altitude conditions. The Incas cultivated over 3,000 different varieties of potatoes, each suited to different altitudes, temperatures, and soil types. This extensive diversity in crops ensured that the Incas were not reliant on any single crop for their survival. In a world where crop failures due to disease, pests, or environmental changes were common, This diversity acted as a safeguard, ensuring that even if one crop failed, others would still thrive. The Incan emphasis on biodiversity also extended to the cultivation of other plants, including grains, vegetables, and fruits, all of which were integrated into their agricultural systems to provide a wide range of nutrients and resources. While the Incas and Maya were mastering the art of farming in challenging climates, the ancient Egyptians were refining their agricultural practices in a very different kind of environment, the arid desert. Despite the challenges posed by the harsh conditions of the Egyptian landscape, their agricultural systems were extraordinarily advanced, thanks in large part to the annual flooding of the Nile River. The Egyptians understood that the success of their crops depended on the delicate timing of the river's flood cycle, which deposited nutrient-rich silt onto their fields. However, the Egyptians didn't just rely on the river's natural cycle. They actively worked with it, using sophisticated irrigation techniques to control the flow of water and ensure a steady supply of moisture to their crops throughout the year. The development of canals, dikes, and reservoirs allowed the Egyptians to store water during the flood season, ensuring that their fields remained irrigated during the dry months. But beyond irrigation, the Egyptians also understood the importance of soil management. They used a variety of methods to enrich the soil, including the application of manure and organic compost, ensuring that their crops received the nutrients they needed to thrive. They also practiced crop rotation, alternating between different crops to prevent soil depletion and maintain soil health. In many ways, the Egyptian agricultural system was an early form of sustainable farming, one that balanced the need for production with the preservation of the land. As we move beyond the major agricultural civilizations of the ancient world, we begin to see a more widespread use of similar techniques across different cultures, each adapting to their own unique environment. In ancient Mesopotamia, for example, the Sumerians and Babylonians developed complex irrigation systems that allowed them to transform the Tigris and Euphrates rivers into lifelines for their civilization. Through the use of canals, levees, and reservoirs, they created a reliable water supply for their fields, allowing them to grow wheat, barley, and other grains. The Sumerians also practiced crop rotation, alternating between different crops to preserve soil fertility. They recognized that in order to sustain their crops over the long term, they needed to maintain the health of the land itself. This early understanding of soil management was a precursor to modern sustainable farming techniques, where maintaining soil health is considered just as important as producing high yields. But what is perhaps most remarkable about these ancient agricultural practices is the way they were intertwined with the culture, religion, and daily life of these civilizations. In ancient Egypt, for example, the act of planting and harvesting was considered sacred, and the Nile's flood cycle was seen as a divine blessing. The gods were believed to control the seasons and the fertility of the land, and agriculture was regarded as a divine gift. Similarly, in the Maya and Inca civilizations, agriculture was deeply linked to religious rituals and practices. For the Maya, the cultivation of crops was a sacred act performed in honor of their gods, and the harvest was celebrated through elaborate ceremonies. For the Incas, agriculture was seen as a way to honor Pachamama, the earth goddess, and the crops they grew were offerings to the divine. This spiritual connection to the land created a sense of reverence for nature, which may have been key to the sustainability of these ancient agricultural systems. These civilizations didn't just see themselves as masters of the land. They saw themselves as part of a larger, interconnected web of life, where human actions were deeply entwined with the natural world. The agricultural feats of these ancient cultures not only provide us with a fascinating glimpse into their ingenuity and resourcefulness, but they also offer valuable lessons for the modern world. In a time when we face the challenges of climate change, environmental degradation, and the need to feed a growing global population, the sustainable farming practices of ancient civilizations offer a model for how we might work in harmony with the land. From the careful management of water to the cultivation of diverse crops, these ancient societies understood the importance of maintaining a balance between human needs and the health of the environment. Their ability to adapt to different climates, create sustainable systems, and develop a deep respect for the land is something that we can all learn from today. As we face the challenges of the future, it is worth remembering the wisdom of these ancient agricultural pioneers, whose practices continue to shape the way we think about farming, sustainability, and our relationship with nature. In the study of ancient bioengineering, one of the most fascinating elements that continues to intrigue scholars and researchers is the mystery of agricultural knowledge that was passed down through generations. Much of this knowledge was not written down in the way modern science records information. Instead, it was embedded in practices, rituals, and oral traditions. These methods, though incredibly sophisticated, were largely intuitive, based on centuries of careful observation and experimentation. In many ways, these ancient civilizations were like modern scientists, conducting experiments over generations, observing the results, and adjusting their strategies accordingly. However, the results of their trials and errors have largely disappeared, buried under the sands of time, hidden within the remnants of ancient irrigation systems, or encrypted within religious and mythological texts. While we are lucky to have any remnants of this knowledge, we are also left with gaps, pieces of the puzzle that remain unsolved. This raises the inevitable question: what other agricultural secrets have been lost to history? Could there be advanced techniques that we have yet to uncover? The case of ancient Egypt, for example, is particularly revealing. The Egyptians were known for their ability to transform their environment, turning the dry desert into one of the most productive agricultural lands in the ancient world. The Nile was the key to this success, and the Egyptians developed highly advanced irrigation techniques that allowed them to control the flow of water, ensuring that their crops had access to the resources they needed even when the river's natural flooding cycle was unpredictable. But despite the sophistication of their agricultural systems, much of the knowledge that allowed the Egyptians to manipulate their environment is shrouded in mystery. For instance, their understanding of soil chemistry and hydrology was impressive, but how they developed such a precise system without the benefit of modern scientific equipment remains unclear. The techniques they used were passed down through generations, but there is little written record of how they achieved such feats. Was it simply trial and error, or did they possess knowledge that was passed down from even earlier civilizations, knowledge that we are still unaware of today? In the Andes, the Incas faced a different set of challenges. The harsh, mountainous terrain required a completely different approach to agriculture. Yet, like the Egyptians, they managed to transform a difficult environment into a fertile land capable of supporting a large population. The terraces they built in the high-altitude regions of Peru are still a marvel of ancient engineering. They carefully cultivated crops like maize, quinoa, and potatoes in an environment where most crops would not survive. The use of terracing not only prevented soil erosion, but also created a microclimate on the terraces, allowing the Incas to grow crops in regions where the weather would have otherwise been inhospitable. But how did the Incas learn to manipulate the environment in this way? The answer likely lies in the oral traditions passed down from generation to generation, as well as their intimate relationship with the land. What we do know is that the Incas possessed a profound understanding of the ecosystem, and it is clear that they didn't just modify the land. They worked with it in a way that allowed both the crops and the environment to thrive. The ancient Maya, who lived in the dense rainforests of Central America, were also able to overcome the challenges of their environment through careful management of the land. Much like the Incas, the Maya were masters of water management, creating elaborate systems of raised fields, canals, and reservoirs that allowed them to grow crops like maize, beans, and squash in a region known for its heavy rainfall and unpredictable water cycles. But what sets the Maya apart is their ability to integrate agriculture with the surrounding forest. They used agroforestry techniques to manage the soil and promote biodiversity, ensuring that their agricultural systems could withstand the changing climate and the shifting demands of the population. They did not clear the forest entirely to make room for their crops. Instead, they worked with the forest, using trees and other plants to create a sustainable and diverse farming system. This approach not only preserved the integrity of the environment, but also helped maintain soil fertility over the long term. However, despite the sophistication of their agricultural techniques, much of the knowledge that allowed the Maya to sustain their civilization is lost to time. While archaeological evidence provides insight into their practices, much of their agricultural knowledge remains embedded in the myths, rituals, and social structures that define their society. As with other ancient cultures, the Maya passed down their knowledge not through textbooks, but through lived experiences and communal traditions. And while we can reconstruct aspects of their agricultural systems, there are undoubtedly secrets that remain hidden, locked within the cultural practices and spiritual beliefs that define the Maya worldview. Similarly, in the Mesopotamian region, one of the world's earliest agricultural civilizations developed techniques that allowed them to thrive in the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians made use of an intricate network of irrigation systems, controlling the flow of water to their crops with impressive precision. These ancient peoples also understood the importance of soil management and crop rotation, practices that would later become staples of modern farming techniques. But the real mystery lies in the seeds of innovation they planted. Just as the Egyptians used the natural flooding of the Nile to fertilize their crops, the Mesopotamians developed methods of enriching their soil using organic matter, like compost and animal manure. The fertility of the land was central to their agricultural practices, and the knowledge of how to maintain it was passed down through generations. Much like the Maya and Incas, the Mesopotamians' agricultural knowledge was deeply integrated into their religious practices. Agriculture was a sacred act, and the success of the harvest was often attributed to the favor of the gods. Yet, the actual techniques and knowledge behind their success were not always documented, leaving us to wonder how much of their agricultural wisdom was lost in the passage of time. What becomes clear as we explore these ancient agricultural systems is that they were far more sophisticated than we often give them credit for. Each of these cultures developed unique solutions to the challenges posed by their environments, and they did so with a deep understanding of the land, water, and plants they worked with. In many ways, their techniques were the result of a kind of bioengineering, a deliberate and systematic manipulation of the environment to suit their needs. They did not simply adapt to their surroundings. They reshaped them, transforming deserts into fertile fields and forests into productive agricultural systems. However, much of this knowledge was not written down in the way we might expect it to be in modern times. It was embedded in the practices of the people, passed down orally, and reflected in the rituals and customs that defined each society. This presents a challenge for modern scholars, as they attempt to reconstruct the agricultural practices of these ancient civilizations. While archaeology and historical records provide important clues, much of the knowledge remains elusive, hidden within the cultural fabric of these societies. The mystery of lost agricultural knowledge doesn't just apply to ancient civilizations. It also raises important questions about how we pass down knowledge today. As we move further into the future, we face similar challenges to those that ancient peoples faced: how to feed a growing population while managing our resources in a sustainable way. In many ways, the agricultural wisdom of the ancients offers valuable lessons for modern societies. Yet, just as we have lost pieces of that knowledge, we must also ensure that we do not lose our current understanding of sustainable practices. As we continue to face the challenges of climate change, water scarcity, and soil degradation, it's important that we look to the past for inspiration, while also developing new methods to ensure that we do not lose the agricultural knowledge of our time. In this way, the story of ancient bioengineering is both a mystery and a warning. It reminds us of the incredible ingenuity of our ancestors and the knowledge that was passed down through generations. But it also highlights the fragility of that knowledge and the risks of losing it over time. The agricultural systems of ancient civilizations were not just products of their time. They were the results of centuries of trial and error, experimentation, and observation. While we can never fully understand the depths of their knowledge, we can certainly learn from their successes and failures. The lessons of the past are not just about farming. They're about sustainability, resilience, and our relationship with the land. And in the face of modern challenges, These ancient lessons may hold the key to a more sustainable and harmonious future. As we continue our exploration of ancient bioengineering, one of the most profound revelations is the intricate relationship between these civilizations and the very plants they cultivated. The manipulation of crops by ancient peoples wasn't solely driven by necessity. It was a refined science, an art, and an act of deep understanding. In many ways, the agricultural knowledge of ancient societies serves as a testament to their connection with nature. These civilizations recognized that the health of their people was directly tied to the vitality of the land, and they developed systems that ensured not only their survival, but their flourishing. The act of cultivation, for them, was an intricate dialogue with the environment, one that required patience, knowledge, and careful observation. As we examine their practices more closely, it becomes clear that the ancient farmers were not simply planting seeds and waiting for them to grow. They were shaping ecosystems, creating symbiotic relationships between the crops they grew and the land they lived on. The manipulation of plants, the selection of specific varieties, and the cultivation of crops in precise locations were all part of an elaborate system that ensured the success of their agricultural endeavors. One of the most fascinating examples of this deep understanding can be found in the ancient farming practices of the Incas. The Inca Empire, which spanned the Andean mountain range in South America, is often remembered for its remarkable feats of engineering, from the construction of terraced fields to the sophisticated water systems that ensured the fertility of their land. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of Incan agriculture was the extent to which they adapted their crops to the unique microclimates of the Andes. The region, with its diverse altitudes and weather patterns, was not naturally conducive to large-scale farming. Yet the Incas were able to cultivate a wide variety of crops, ranging from potatoes to quinoa, maize, and even cotton. Each crop was carefully selected and cultivated in a specific region, based on the climate and altitude that would be most beneficial for its growth. Potatoes, for example, were grown at higher altitudes, where the cooler temperatures made them more resilient to pests and disease, while maize thrived at lower elevations, where the warmer climate helped the plants grow tall and produce large ears of corn. The Incas didn't simply plant crops in the ground. They tailored their farming practices to the very essence of their environment, ensuring that each crop had the optimal conditions in which to thrive. The concept of microclimates is key to understanding how the Incas mastered agriculture. These small, localized climates were shaped by factors such as elevation, slope, and the proximity to water sources, and the Incas used this natural variation to their advantage. By building terraces into the mountainsides, they created distinct growing environments for each type of crop, maximizing the potential of the land. These terraces, some of which are still standing today, were not just farming plots. They were carefully designed agricultural systems that took into account the subtle changes in temperature, sunlight, and moisture that each level of the mountain experienced. The terraces allowed for better drainage, preventing waterlogging, and also provided a buffer against the harsh winds that could damage crops at higher elevations. The Inca farmers' ability to read the land and use these microclimates to their advantage was one of the keys to their success, and it is an example of bioengineering at its finest. While the Incas were refining their agricultural systems in the high Andes, another great civilization, the ancient Egyptians, was cultivating the fertile land along the banks of the Nile River. Unlike the Andean mountains, Egypt's geography presented a different set of challenges for its farmers. The annual flooding of the Nile provided a natural irrigation system, depositing nutrient-rich silt onto the fields and making agriculture in the otherwise barren desert possible. However, it wasn't just the flooding of the Nile that made Egyptian agriculture so successful. It was their innovative use of irrigation and soil management techniques. The Egyptians understood that the key to successful farming wasn't just about planting crops and waiting for the floodwaters to reseed. It was about actively managing the water to ensure that their fields were adequately irrigated throughout the year. They built canals, reservoirs, and dikes to control the flow of water, and they developed methods to trap and store water during the flood season, allowing them to irrigate their fields even when the river's water levels were low. This careful management of water allowed the Egyptians to grow a variety of crops, including wheat, barley, flax, and papyrus, ensuring a steady food supply for their civilization. But the Egyptians didn't stop at irrigation. They also practiced crop rotation, ensuring that the soil remained fertile year after year. They understood that different crops had different nutrient requirements, and by rotating crops, they were able to prevent soil depletion and maintain the health of their fields. This technique, which modern farmers are rediscovering as part of sustainable farming practices, was a cornerstone of Egyptian agriculture. In addition to crop rotation, the Egyptians also used organic matter, such as manure, to enrich their soil and keep it fertile. They understood the importance of maintaining soil health, not only for the success of their crops, but also for the long-term sustainability of their agricultural system. The Egyptians' deep understanding of soil management and their ability to manipulate the natural environment to suit their needs laid the foundation for agricultural practices that would endure for centuries. While the Egyptians and Incas were perfecting their farming methods, the Maya civilization was developing its own sophisticated agricultural systems in the dense jungles of Central America. The Maya, like the Incas, faced the challenge of growing crops in a harsh environment, where soil quality was poor and rainfall was unpredictable. Yet, like their Andean counterparts, the Maya were able to transform the land, creating an agricultural system that supported a thriving civilization. The Maya's approach to farming was rooted in their understanding of the land's rhythms, and they developed a variety of techniques to ensure the fertility of their soil and the productivity of their crops. One of the most impressive aspects of Maya agriculture was their use of raised fields, which were built on swampy or flooded land. These raised fields allowed the Maya to grow crops in areas that would otherwise have been unsuitable for farming, and they also helped to control the flow of water during the rainy season, preventing flooding and ensuring that crops received adequate moisture during dry spells. In addition to raised fields, the Maya also practiced agroforestry, a method of farming that integrates trees, crops, and other plants into a sustainable system. This approach allowed the Maya to cultivate a diverse range of crops, while also maintaining the integrity of the surrounding forest. The trees provided shade, which helped to regulate soil temperature and moisture, and they also contributed to soil fertility by fixing nitrogen in the soil. The Maya used this system to grow a variety of crops, including maize, beans, squash, cacao, and chili peppers. The diversity of crops not only provided a steady food supply, but also helped to protect the land from erosion and nutrient depletion. In many ways, the Maya were pioneers of sustainable farming, creating an agricultural system that worked in harmony with the natural environment. While the Maya, Incas, and Egyptians were busy developing sophisticated farming techniques, another civilization, the ancient Mesopotamians, was laying the groundwork for modern agriculture in the Fertile Crescent. The Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians developed some of the earliest known irrigation systems, using canals and dikes to control the flow of water from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. They also practiced crop rotation and soil management, ensuring that their land remained fertile and productive. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of Mesopotamian agriculture was the way in which it was integrated into their religious and social systems. Agriculture was not simply a means of survival. It was a sacred act, and the success of the harvest was often seen as a reflection of divine favor. The agricultural knowledge that underpinned their civilization was passed down through generations, preserved not only in practical techniques, but also in religious rituals, myths, and prayers. When we step back and look at the agricultural feats of these ancient civilizations, it becomes clear that they shared a common thread, a profound understanding of their environment, coupled with a deep respect for the natural world. They were bioengineers long before modern science, manipulating the land, the water, and the plants they cultivated to suit their needs. But what is perhaps most remarkable about these civilizations is their ability to do so without the modern tools and knowledge we take for granted today. They didn't have genetic engineering, advanced irrigation systems, or modern farming equipment, but they did have an intimate knowledge of the land, an ability to observe and learn from the natural world, and a willingness to experiment and innovate. This blend of practical knowledge and intuition allowed them to create agricultural systems that were sustainable, resilient, and productive. And as we face the challenges of feeding a growing global population in an era of climate change, we would do well to look back at these ancient practices and learn from the bioengineering wisdom that has been passed down through the ages. As we continue to explore the ancient agricultural marvels that have shaped human civilization, it becomes increasingly evident that the practices developed by these early cultures were not merely practical solutions to their environment. They were profound expressions of their understanding of nature. These societies, from the Egyptians along the Nile to the Incas in the high Andes, not only managed the land but seemingly held a deeper connection to it, a relationship that was both spiritual and scientific. Their agricultural systems were born out of necessity but refined through generations of careful observation, experimentation, and reverence for the earth. What stands out in all these civilizations is their ingenuity in transforming difficult landscapes in a fertile ground capable of sustaining vast populations. Their achievements were not solely about survival. They were about thriving, creating cultures that were rich in art, science, philosophy, and religion, all sustained by the land they nurtured. However, while their agricultural systems were sophisticated, the real mystery lies in the methods they employed to achieve these feats. Some of these practices have been lost to time, buried in the ruins of their once great empires, leaving us with only fragments of knowledge that are difficult to reconstruct. In the case of ancient Egypt, one of the earliest and most sophisticated agricultural civilizations, the land along the Nile was the key to their success. The Egyptians harnessed the annual flooding of the Nile, which deposited nutrient-rich silt onto the fields, creating a fertile landscape in an otherwise arid environment. Yet, this gift from the river was unpredictable, and the Egyptians had to develop highly advanced systems of irrigation and water management to ensure their crops flourished. The construction of canals, dams, and reservoirs to control the flow of water was essential to this effort. What is fascinating, however, is how the Egyptians understood the river not merely as a resource, but as an essential part of their religious worldview. The flooding of the Nile was seen as a divine gift, controlled by the gods, and their agricultural practices were often accompanied by rituals and ceremonies meant to honor these divine forces. This blending of the spiritual and the practical not only ensured the survival of their agricultural systems, but also reinforced the deep connection between the Egyptians and the land. The success of Egyptian agriculture was also rooted in their mastery of soil management. The Egyptians did not merely rely on the river's floodwaters to replenish the soil each year. They actively enriched the land through the use of organic matter, like animal manure and compost, ensuring that the soil retained its fertility. They practiced crop rotation, alternating between different crops to prevent soil depletion, a technique that modern farmers are only now rediscovering as part of sustainable farming practices. The Egyptians' understanding of soil health and the importance of maintaining it for future generations was a crucial aspect of their long-term agricultural success. In many ways, they were early pioneers of sustainable farming, understanding that the land was not a limitless resource, but something to be cared for, nurtured, and respected. Similarly, in the high-altitude regions of the Andes, the Incas achieved incredible feats of agricultural engineering. The Incan Empire, which stretched across modern-day Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador, was built on the backbone of its agricultural systems, which were uniquely adapted to the challenging Andean terrain. Unlike the flat plains of Mesopotamia or Egypt, the Andes presented a diverse and rugged landscape with varying altitudes, climates, and ecosystems. The Incas, however, did not see these challenges as obstacles, but as opportunities to innovate. Through the creation of terraces, they transformed the steep mountain slopes into a network of flat, arable land, each level of the terrace carefully designed to suit specific crops. The terraces served multiple purposes. They not only increased the amount of usable land, but also helped to regulate temperature and moisture levels, providing a stable environment for crops. The Incas planted potatoes at higher altitudes, where the cooler temperatures and harsher conditions made the crop more resistant to pests, while crops like maize and quinoa thrived at lower elevations. What is particularly remarkable about Incan agriculture is the extensive diversity of crops they cultivated. The Incas did not rely on a single crop, but instead grew hundreds of different varieties, each suited to a specific microclimate or altitude. This diversity was essential for maintaining the stability of their agricultural system, as it ensured that even if one crop failed, others would still thrive. Potatoes, for example, were the cornerstone of Incan agriculture, and the Incas cultivated over 3,000 different varieties, each adapted to a particular environment. The Incas' deep understanding of the relationship between soil, climate, and crops allowed them to grow a wide range of plants in an area that would seem inhospitable to farming. This knowledge of biodiversity and its role in ensuring agricultural resilience was not simply a product of trial and error. It was the result of centuries of observation, experimentation, and refinement. In addition to their mastery of the land, the Incas were also experts in water management. The high-altitude nature of the Andes meant that water was scarce in some regions, and yet, the Incas were able to redirect and store water through a series of aqueducts, canals, and reservoirs. These water systems were essential to maintaining the fertility of the terraces and ensuring that crops received the proper amount of moisture. The Incas' ability to manage and distribute water across such a vast and varied landscape was a testament to their sophisticated understanding of hydrology and the natural environment. In many ways, their agricultural success was built on the careful balance between the land, water, and crops, a balance that the Incas cultivated with remarkable precision. While the Incas and Egyptians were refining their agricultural techniques, the Maya civilization in Mesoamerica was also making significant strides in agricultural innovation. The Maya, who lived in the tropical rainforests of Central America, faced a unique set of challenges when it came to farming. The region's soil was often poor and acidic, and rainfall could be both erratic and intense. Yet, the Maya developed a complex system of agriculture that allowed them to thrive in this challenging environment. One of the key innovations of Maya agriculture was the use of raised fields. These fields were built on swampy or flooded land and were designed to improve drainage, reduce the risk of flooding, and allow for better soil aeration. The raised fields also helped to retain heat, which was particularly important for crops like maize, which thrived in warmer conditions. In addition to raised fields, the Maya also practiced agroforestry, a method of farming that integrated trees and other plants into the agricultural system. This approach allowed the Maya to grow a diverse range of crops while maintaining the integrity of the surrounding forest. The trees provided shade, which helped regulate temperature and moisture, and also contributed to soil fertility by fixing nitrogen in the soil. The Maya were able to cultivate crops like maize, beans, squash, and cacao, as well as a variety of fruits and vegetables, all within a sustainable system that worked in harmony with the surrounding environment. The Maya's deep knowledge of their ecosystem and their ability to adapt their farming techniques to suit the land was a key factor in their success. The agricultural practices of the Maya, like those of the Incas and Egyptians, were closely intertwined with their religious beliefs. Agriculture was not merely a means of producing food, it was an act of reverence for the gods. The Maya believed that the fertility of the land was a divine gift, and they conducted rituals and ceremonies to honor the gods of agriculture. This spiritual connection to the land helped to ensure the sustainability of their agricultural practices, as the Maya saw themselves as caretakers of the earth rather than mere exploiters of its resources. As we reflect on the agricultural achievements of these ancient civilizations, it becomes clear that their success was not merely the result of trial and error. It was the product of a deep and nuanced understanding of the natural world. From the irrigation systems of Egypt to the terraces of the Incas, these civilizations were bioengineers long before the term was coined. They manipulated their environments in ways that allowed them to grow crops in some of the harshest conditions on Earth, and they did so with an intimate knowledge of soil, water, climate, and biodiversity. What makes these agricultural feats even more remarkable is that they were achieved without the modern technology and scientific knowledge that we have today. Their methods were born out of necessity, but refined through generations of observation, experimentation, and reverence for the land. And yet, despite the sophistication of their agricultural systems, much of the knowledge that allowed these civilizations to thrive has been lost to time. While archaeological evidence provides us with clues about their practices, the true depth of their agricultural knowledge is hidden in the gaps, locked within ancient myths, rituals, and oral traditions. These lost secrets are part of the ongoing mystery that surrounds these ancient cultures. What techniques did they use that we have yet to uncover? How did they manage to create such sustainable systems without the tools and resources we have today? As we face the challenges of feeding a growing global population and protecting our environment, there is much we can learn from these ancient bioengineers. Their wisdom, though buried in the sands of time, continues to offer valuable lessons for the future. As we venture deeper into the intricate world of ancient agricultural techniques, it becomes increasingly apparent that the wisdom of these ancient civilizations was not only practical, but profoundly rooted in their connection to the earth. These societies did not merely manipulate their environments. They cultivated a relationship with nature that was as much spiritual as it was technical. The depth of their understanding was woven into their daily lives, rituals, and cultural practices. In many ways, their agricultural feats are not just a testament to their ingenuity, but to the harmony they sought to create between themselves and the land. This deep connection to nature is reflected in the careful, sustainable methods they employed, which have left a lasting legacy that is still relevant in our quest for a more sustainable future. What is perhaps most compelling is that despite the challenges posed by the environments in which they lived, these civilizations thrived for centuries, creating systems of agriculture that were not only highly productive, but also remarkably adaptable. Consider the ancient Sumerians, who cultivated the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The Sumerians lived in an environment that was both a blessing and a curse. While the soil was rich due to the annual flooding of the rivers, the region was also prone to droughts and unpredictable floods. The Sumerians were one of the first civilizations to develop large-scale irrigation systems, channeling the water from the rivers into canals that spread throughout their fields. This allowed them to control the water supply and ensure that their crops received consistent moisture, regardless of the whims of nature. But what makes their irrigation systems even more remarkable is the way they used the land's natural features to their advantage. They built their irrigation canals to follow the natural contours of the land, making use of gravity to transport water efficiently. This system was not just about technical innovation. It was an expression of their deep understanding of the land hydrology and how to harness its power. The Sumerians were among the first to recognize that successful agriculture was not just about planting seeds. It was about creating a system that could be sustained over the long term. What is fascinating about these ancient irrigation systems is that they were not solely the product of individual ingenuity, but were embedded in the culture and spiritual beliefs of the Sumerians. Agriculture was seen as a sacred act, and the successful harvest was believed to be a sign of divine favor. In Sumerian mythology, the gods were seen as the ultimate controllers of the river's flooding and, by extension, the fertility of the land. The connection between agriculture and spirituality was so strong that temples were often built near irrigation canals, and priests were tasked with overseeing the water supply and ensuring that it was used wisely. This sacred relationship between the land and the divine was a key element in maintaining the balance that allowed the Sumerians to flourish. This connection to the divine is not unique to the Sumerians. It is a thread that runs through many ancient agricultural civilizations, from Egypt to the Americas, where agriculture was often seen as a form of worship. In Egypt, for instance, the ancient Egyptians built a sophisticated system of canals and reservoirs to control the flow of water from the Nile River. The flooding of the Nile was not only a critical event for their crops, but it was also a divine phenomenon, believed to be the tears of the goddess Isis. Every year, As the floodwaters began to recede, the Egyptians would celebrate the return of fertility to the land, and they would perform rituals to ensure the continued favor of the gods. The floodwaters left behind a thick layer of nutrient-rich silt, which rejuvenated the soil and made it possible to grow crops such as wheat, barley, and flax. But the Egyptians did not rely solely on the floodwaters. They actively managed their water resources, using a series of dams, sluices, and reservoirs to store water during the flood season and irrigate their fields during the dry months. Their understanding of water management was not just about efficiency. It was an expression of their reverence for the gods and their recognition that the land's fertility was a gift. The Incas, too, integrated agriculture into their religious and cultural beliefs. The Inca Empire spanned the high-altitude regions of the Andes, a place where most crops would struggle to grow. Yet, the Incas managed to build a thriving agricultural system in this harsh terrain by creating terraces on the mountainsides. These terraces not only increased the area of arable land, but also helped to regulate temperature, moisture, and sunlight, making it possible to grow a variety of crops at different altitudes. What's even more remarkable is how the Incas integrated the environment into their religious practices. Agriculture was seen as a way of honoring Pachamama, the earth goddess, and the crops they grew were offered as a form of tribute. The agricultural system was not just about feeding the people. It was about sustaining a sacred relationship with the earth. The Incas saw themselves as stewards of the land, and their agricultural practices were an integral part of this sacred duty. The Maya, who inhabited the dense rainforests of Central America, also had a deep connection to the land. Their farming techniques were developed in response to the unique challenges posed by their environment. The soil was often poor and acidic, and rainfall could be both erratic and intense. Yet, the Maya were able to cultivate a wide variety of crops, including maize, beans, and squash, by developing a sophisticated system of raised fields. These fields were built above the swampy ground and were designed to improve drainage and aeration while also helping to retain heat. The raised fields allowed the Maya to grow crops in areas that would otherwise have been unsuitable for farming, and they also helped to prevent flooding during the rainy season. In addition to the raised fields, the Maya practiced agroforestry, a technique that involved planting crops alongside trees and other plants to create a more sustainable and biodiverse farming system. The trees provided shade and helped to regulate temperature and moisture, while also contributing to soil fertility by fixing nitrogen. The Maya's approach to farming was not just about survival. It was about creating a harmonious relationship between the land, the crops, and the people. What is striking about all these ancient civilizations is that their agricultural systems were not just designed to meet immediate needs. They were developed with an eye toward long-term sustainability. They understood that the land was not a resource to be exploited, but a living system that required careful management and respect. In many ways, their agricultural techniques were a form of bioengineering, a conscious effort to shape the environment in ways that would ensure the survival of their cultures. These ancient societies were pioneers of sustainable agriculture, understanding that the balance between human needs and the health of the land was crucial to their continued prosperity. Yet, despite their remarkable achievements, much of the knowledge that allowed these civilizations to thrive has been lost over time. The methods and techniques they developed were passed down orally and were embedded in their cultural practices, but as their societies collapsed or were absorbed by other cultures, much of this knowledge was forgotten. The very systems that allowed these civilizations to survive and prosper are now mysteries, waiting to be uncovered. This loss of knowledge is a reminder of the fragility of human progress and the importance of preserving the wisdom of the past.